Now on to a Supreme Court case with the power to rewrite how Washington works. Justices right now weighing whether presidents can fire heads of independent agencies at will, a move that could shift decades of precedent when it comes to separation of powers. Let's dive a little deeper into what all this means with Emory Professor of Law, Jonathan Nash. Jonathan, appreciate you coming on. And let's dive right into this. The Supreme Court weighing this big question right now, whether presidents can fire these independent heads. What's the core constitutional question here at the heart of all this?
Well, I would say the key constitutional question is that generally the Constitution says that the president has the power to appoint people to head up agencies and freedom to get rid of people. These independent agencies, the one at issue in this case is the Federal Trade Commission, goes back over 100 years. And what Congress did was say we're going to have several members head up this board, this commission, and they have to be of particular divided political parties. And the idea was that the president couldn't remove people who were previously appointed unless there was some malfeasance, some bad action by these folks. And that's been the rule for nearly 100 years. So the question really becomes, does the Constitution allow Congress to limit the president's ability to fire the heads of these commissions and boards?
I mean, I know you've been following these arguments closely, and we're still months away from a decision, but did you see any signs from the justices about where they may be leaning on this?
Well, it seems, again, you never want to read the tea leaves too much, but it seems that the court was dividing along the what people would say typical ideological lines, with the three Democratic appointed justices saying the president's limitation on removing people should continue, but the six justices appointed by Republican presidents, most of them, if not all of them, signaling that they were prepared to say the president does have the power, that Congress cannot restrict the ability of the president to fire and remove the heads of these agencies.
You had mentioned the FTC kind of being at the center of this for right now. I'm curious about the Federal Reserve, for example, because President Trump has been on the record saying he'd love to fire Fed President Jay Powell. Can you give some examples of some of the other agencies that might be at stake here?
So there are other agencies. I'm going to get to the Federal Reserve because that is a tougher question, I think. But there's the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Merit Services Protection Board. There are several of these independent commissions. Now, the Federal Reserve gets to another level. That's the board that sort of heads up financial policy and decides they just decided to lower interest rates. Mm-hmm. And there, even the more conservative justices, some of them have signaled, don't go so fast on whether the president can get rid of the head, one of the members of the governors of the Federal Reserve. There's another case that's going to be argued this term where Trump is trying to fire a member of the Federal Reserve. So I think the court will have to consider that question. And there's some indication, even if they say you can fire members of the Federal Trade Commission, maybe that wouldn't apply to the Federal Reserve. But we'll have to see. And the justices will have to see how to write opinions that maybe go in two different directions on that.
That's going to be interesting to watch. Lisa Cook, by the way, the woman you were referencing there. The president has, always been that these agencies can get their work done in Washington without being beholden to the White House. So if the president can fire these heads at will all of a sudden, what do you think that means for agency independence?
Well, there's no question that by some definition of the agency being independent of the president, that will go down. The argument the other way is independent agencies, if the president can't remove them, except for bad cause, the heads of the agencies, they're not really accountable. So you get these independent roving agencies, and the argument the other way, and there's an argument that the Constitution set it up this way, is that you want agencies to be democratically accountable. Now, whether that should be through the president being able to fire people willy-nilly or some other way, I don't know. But that is very much the question. I agree with you. The agencies will be less independent. The argument in favor of that is, well, if you don't like what the agency is doing, you can cast your vote in a presidential election or congressional election and get change at the agency, which, if they're independent, much harder to do.
Jonathan, final question, just real quick here on this. For people watching home saying, so what, how could this possibly affect people's lives here in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta?
Well, the Federal Trade Commission is sort of charged with looking at unfair competition. So think about anti-monopoly laws, things like that. So to the extent that the president is able to change the membership heading up the agency, it can affect the enforcement priorities of the agency. That could be positive or negative, again, for anybody, but it definitely could take things down a different path for all of these agencies. It'll make things under this administration adhere more closely to President Trump's agenda.
Okay. Jonathan Nash from Emory University, we appreciate your time and helping us make sense of all this.